Good morning and welcome to the Management and Social Justice Series Roundtable event. My name is Latha Poonamallee and I'm the chair of the management faculty at the New School. As some of you repeat attendees know, this is the first year of the series and we are planning to send out a call for submission to participate and featured in the second year series as well. This year, we are featuring 2 events a month, one on the first Thursdays and the second one on third Wednesdays, either at noon or 11 a.m. Eastern. This series was born out of a deep and abiding interest in learning and teaching how to create and nurture, manage organizations and management as a vehicle for social justice. So this inquiry and the question and the series brings together our disciplinary expertise on management and organizations with our values, and particularly the New School values of social justice and inclusion. It has a remarkable interest in participation, and I'm really delighted that we are able to offer this cutting-edge series completely free and accessible to all. So we do record the sessions, and we will be sharing informal recordings after the event. And so some of the housekeeping issues, we do record them. You can use the Q&A tab to put in your questions. You can also chat with all the attendees and the panelists using the chat feature. And so in this event, the roundtable actually brings together 3 critical, interesting research questions. And the primary question the roundtable addresses is that how might we leverage the tools of advocacy, participatory management, environmental justice, and inclusive storytelling to build more equitable organizations? And the event is actually moderated by Jill Mosibak, who is one of our own. She is a recent alum from the Management Organizational Change Management Program. And Jill, until very recently, served as a Director of Partnerships with the Tribeca Film Institute. And soon over to you, Jill. Thank you very much and welcome everybody again.
Thank you so much, Latha. Welcome everyone to Inside Out, Redesigning Organizations for Social Justice. This is the 9th virtual event in the New School's Management and Social Justice Conversation Series. Again, my name is Jill. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a proud alum of the Organizational Change Management grad program at the Milano School. Among multiple intersectional identities, I consider myself a pragmatic idealist working in the field of organizational change management. My work focuses on the people side of change, specifically how individuals move through the change process within institutions. And as such, my work leans heavily on relationships, communications, equitable leadership, stakeholder engagement, and coaching. That's a lot of management speak, but what's important to understand before we dive into the panelists is that unlike many business schools and other management programs on the market, Milano really stands out for its focus on social justice. This can seem contradictory given management's historical function as a tool of oppression, but the New School actively works against this and through its curriculum and fieldwork. Importantly, it holds this tension between management and social justice in order to create space for new, emergent, and transformative leadership, which is absolutely critical for this time we're in of racial reckoning, especially in the US. We have a brilliant panel of other pragmatic idealists with us today who will present their research on 3 very different but interconnected topics. They will take us on a journey from human resources management in the Caribbean to regional and environmental power dynamics in the Indian Himalayas, and to the world of fairy tales and creative storytelling as emerging modes of organizational diagnosis and change. They will interrogate traditional organizational structures, management practices, and value systems that are rooted in colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy culture. Our goal is to hold these tensions and these competing values in an effort to uproot the unjust paradigms and create fertile ground for new leadership and new growth and a new era of justice that truly lives up to the rights and the values of our communities. The format for today is that I will introduce each panelist prior to their presentation. Then we will engage in a group discussion based on the topics they introduce. And then there will be a Q&A at the end. There's a Q&A feature, which you're welcome to use for that portion. Also, throughout the presentations, if questions come up for you, feel free to also drop them in the chat thread, and we'll monitor that as well. And now it is my honor to introduce the first panelist, Dr. Alavette Hines-Jordan. She will be discussing value systems and ideologies, specifically within human resources management practices, and the implications that has for HR practitioners today. Some background on Dr. Hines-Jordan. She brings over 20 years of human resource leadership and change management experience from private sector organizations in the US and the Caribbean. Her work involves shifting organizational cultures toward more equitable and inclusive employee relations, talent development, performance management, and compensation practices. At Rotherley Construction, she championed the transition after unionization that ended work stoppages, resulted in improved working conditions, and increased client satisfaction. Alavette has a PhD in business psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, a master's in organizational change management from the New School, and a bachelor's in management and psychology from the University of West Indies Cave Hill campus in Barbados. She was born in Barbados, where she served as an Army sergeant. She was a board member of the Human Resources Management Association of Barbados. She currently resides in Brooklyn and volunteers for the Taproot Foundation. Dr. Hines-Jordan, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jill. Allow me to share my screen. A warm welcome from Barbados, where I'm keeping safe during this pandemic. Just want to say thank you to Jill and to Latha, and of course to Milano for the opportunity to present at this series. I'm sorry. Of course, we know that this series was supposed to be an in-person presentation. However, we're thankful to the technology for affording us to be able to do it in this format. I want to acknowledge my fellow presenters. I look forward to your presentations as well. And I want to say a special thanks to the audience for your time and your interest. And we look forward to your participation and engagement. So before I get into my presentation, let me set the stage for this research and how I got to this point. And I'm going to ask a question. What would you do after you engage in a 3-hour-long conversation? Could be a fight, an argument, whatever you want to label it. And the reason was simply to justify the fact that you should be paid more. And all the while, there are tears, rivers of tears running down your cheeks. So no preparation with any tissue, so you could imagine the mess that it was. And to realize that one of your colleagues is at the door offering you a pair of boxing gloves. So then, how do you manage the emotional stress associated with an experience like that? What would you do? And as you think on that question for a minute, let me share that that was my experience as a young woman. And at that time, I had no frame of reference to understand or to label what had just happened. And I took the decision to walk away from the job. And that decision was taken even after I got much more than I was asking for in the end. That is how I got into HR management. No plan, no prior career plan, but that is where I landed. And ever since then, I've been working in different sectors across the US, as Jill said, and in the Caribbean. But over the years, my experience has shown that no matter what organization you're in, no matter what country you're in, the experience and the decisions and the behaviors in relations to HR practices are similar. So in the past 5 years, I have consulted on 3 major change projects. And again, similar experiences, although the contexts were different. And more recently in 2018 and 2019, I found myself facilitating a workshop on people management strategies. And my participants were only white males. And I let that sink in with you for a minute. So in the next 10 to 12 minutes, what I'll share with you is dominant value systems, and I'll look at how they impact HR practices. And I'll share some anecdotal observations. I'll look at the complexities and tensions in the context of business transformation and the evolving role of HR. And in the end, I look at tools for collaboration, advocacy, and change. And then I look forward to a discussion during the question and answer session. There are various, I should say, value systems that impact an organization. And these are not in isolation. Of course, depending on the organization you're in, one may be more prevalent than the other. You may have a market-driven organization per se, where profit making is the goal. And this can result in limited investment in employee development, or you can have a conservative value system where it's very authoritative and power and top-down decision-making structures are the reality. Or you can have a critical theory perspective where, as you would have heard Jill mention, I would have championed the after unionization when Rodley Construction became unionized. And in that scenario, what you had was people who felt so marginalized that they were forced to join a union. And how do these play out? Well, of course, they will be different in the East and in the West, where you have individualistic cultures versus collectivist cultures. You have different societal values, you have social, you have economic, and you have the political. And obviously you have personal biases which may come into play to help impact the decisions or affect the decisions, I should say. And then you look at the Caribbean, within the Caribbean context, where we are steeped or rooted in colonialization, and you get an experience where there's loyalty, or we're socialized to be more paternalistic because of the plantocracy that we would have outlived, or in the earlier days. Basically, there are lots of power bases. You have Black and white structures and a general unwillingness to challenge power. And of course, there are other issues that could impact the organization as well. And in addition to these dominant or prevailing cultures or value systems that would impact organizations, then you have the competing values, which are more directly related to the business. So in this slide, you're taking a look at the competing values framework, which proposes that an organization is either inwardly focused or externally focused, and it's either striving for flexibility or stability, which gives us 4 quadrants. with various cultures and various value systems. And within each quadrant, there is a specified role for the HR practitioner. For example, in quadrant 4, where there's a market type competition, one of the tensions that is likely to arise is if the organization is seeking profitability, but the value system is one that favors collaboration, then we can see that there's likely to be tension because performance issues will arise. Alternately, if we go to quadrant 3, which is the hierarchy and controlling culture, we will be looking at performance metrics, an organization that is heavily focused on performance metrics as well. And that would see a decrease in things like pay. There will be continuous restructuring per se, workforce restructuring, in an effort to keep pay low. You may see a reduction in pensions. And within a clan culture, an organization that is predominantly focusing on a clan culture, it is highly unlikely that performance issues will be called out because we are seeking, our employees, leaders included, will be seeking to protect each other based on that familial type of relation. And that brings a degree of tension for an HR practitioner who is seeking to perform within any of these quadrants, because you would recognize that an organization will have some element of each culture at any one point in time. This next slide highlights some of the tensions created by the competing values framework. When we talk about organizational transformation and you're in a clan culture, you're talking about a degree of change that is long-term change. Basically, you have time to plan and you know where you're going. In an adhocracy type culture, the change is more transformational. So in essence, you're seeking to change the entire organization. In the hierarchy, the changes are more incremental, where you'll be looking at maybe changing the system, maybe changing out technology, something like that, but some small intervention over the course of time. But in the market, when you're in a competitive market environment, change is fast. It is fast. So the takeaway from this slide is that each quadrant must be treated co-equal because there are pluses and negatives to adopting anyone at any one point in time. And we all know, as I mentioned before, of HR practices that would have become misaligned. I'm not going to dwell here too much on this because you would appreciate that since the pandemic and since especially in the US and other parts of the world, there have been multiple protests, which has changed the external environment, which also impacts organizations. Organizations now have to respond to those external threats, and I'm thinking that the practices and the misalignment will appear in very different shades. So suffice to say that as we seek to realign practices, there will be rift with challenges unless we can get it right. So what are some of the current issues facing organizations? As I just mentioned, you have societal crisis and health, environmental challenges, we have economic, we have structural unemployment, and there are the political challenges. There is a fight for justice and equality, and the social movements, protests are on the increase, they're on the rise. Basically, individuals are seeking greater equity, greater justice within organizations. But to me, all is not lost. I believe that the pandemic and the current complexities have afforded us the opportunity to reimagine HR and to reimagine HR in a way that we have never seen it before. So, and to redesign our organizations in a way that are more equitable. All things being considered. So that will bring me back to another look at the competent values framework. I believe that as organizations converge and respond to this transformative change, that the role of HR has to be more central. And the values that drive the organizations have to be shifted. In the plan culture, we have to look at some more compassion, trust, empathy, respect. And as we're hearing, quite often we're looking for agility and resilience as we respond. And in relation to keeping safe, safety is also a major concern, especially as we implement the COVID protocols. And also another area that will need to be focused on around compliance is employee security and customer security as we engage more technology. So I believe that those scenarios open up some exciting opportunities for HR and for business leaders on the whole. As I said, the shift in HR has now been focused on things like remote work, dealing with productivity, of course, making sure that as people are not in the traditional sense being seen that they're still working, as some employers may believe that because an employee is not within a physical structure that they can be seen and supervised daily, that they're not performing. We also have the remote work, and we have what opportunities will COVID bring up for us. We have mental health issues, well-being issues, parenting issues, and HR has to be able to respond to these scenarios in a way that we've never been asked to before. And this is a very dynamic shift, in my opinion, and one which has brought us back to the question, the age-old question: will HR grab its seat at the table? And this question has been around for a long time, and I don't know that we've had an answer to it, but certainly the time is right for some reconsideration of this question as we reimagine what the HR function is going to look like as we seek to respond to the current challenges. So before I go any further, I would like to engage members of the audience in seeking to hear a bit more about some of the HR priorities that your organization is grappling with. So if you would take a minute to complete the poll here, I appreciate it if you answer the poll question. What are your organization's current HR or diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities? Oh, wow. Some very interesting results, responses, and As I suspected, many organizations are focusing on diversity hiring and racial equity and inclusivity training, gender equity issues. And I'm going to suggest that those things will continue as we seek to rebalance or bring greater balance to the organizations. However, I am not so your responses correlate with mine. I think what I would also add is emphasis around parent and elder care, accommodating employees who have to take care of their children and who are looking after their elderly parents or relatives, and also making employment decisions around the COVID pandemic. You would have heard, obviously, businesses are closing, they're reopening, and that also brings a lot of tension and a lot of focus around who gets to be employed, who gets to stay home, and issues like that. So I'm suggesting that HR, in addition to looking at these things, must have a voice. And in my opinion, I think that the time is right for the HR function to be championed at a higher level. I think that the issues are grave enough that we need to go a step further than the seat at the table, because we are going to need some deep and meaningful change that will require a change in narrative to ensure that individuals become more equity partners in organizations, reduced focus on compliance issues, to a more strategic placement, C-suite, and board representation, to me, now has to become part of the norm. But in addition to where we place the HR function in the organization structure, we also need to use different skills. I believe that HR, if the rope was tight before, it will become even tighter. And according to SHRM in August this year reported that 20% white versus 40% Black HR professionals are uncomfortable voicing opinions about racial justice issues. That is major, and it suggests to me that we need to get more comfortable and to be trained and acquire skills that will allow us to have those difficult conversations, as we also need to re-examine the work that our DEI experts are doing, possibly the way we train our HR professionals and leaders within business schools. Just need to look at different types of skills that would equip us for this, work. It is going to be oh boy, I'm so sorry. It is going to be very emotionally heavy lifting work that we have to engage in. And I'm suggesting that we need to get different skills, as I said earlier, look at things like more advocacy, maybe approach our conversations with greater humility, be more positive, using more appreciative inquiry in terms of resilience and the way we look at what's working versus what's not working, and be vulnerable to have these conversations. I believe that the tensions they will intensify before they get better. And we have to be comfortable with doing the work that will dismantle the barriers like egos and different personality biases and different structures that have been so ingrained.
Hi, thank you, Olivette. We're a bit out of time and we have to move on to the next speaker. Thank you so much. If you could just stop sharing your screen and we will move on to the next presenters. All right, thank you so much. Yes, the time is ripe to reimagine HR, especially now and especially post-election. And we already have a few questions in the Q&A section, which we will address live in the Q&A portion, FYI. Okay. Our next presenters will be discussing the Indian administrative model and green growth, redesigning the Apex Administrative Organization for equitable citizen participation. It's my honor to introduce Shruti and Thriti. Shruti is a PhD researcher at the Department of Land Economy, Queen's College. Her academic foundations lie in political science and economics. She has worked with various national and international organizations for social change through policy interventions. Her current area of focus is the social impact of renewable energy transition in India, with a special focus on the Indian Himalayan region. Shruti holds a PhD from Queen's College, Cambridge, a master's from JNU in New Delhi, and a bachelor's in political science from Delhi University. She is joined by her co-presenter, Thriti, who's a PhD researcher in IDC School of Design at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. She is a transportation designer with an enduring interest in urban sustainability. She has worked with industry leaders in India and Japan for more than a decade in mobility and design. She has focused her work on equitable mobility solutions and gender parity in public spaces. Her current research is focused on participatory approaches to exploring design capabilities in public transport in India. Thriti holds a master's in urban sustainability from King's College London and a bachelor's in design from the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. Shruti and Thriti, welcome. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jill. The slides. Thank you. So our presentation today focuses on the ability of formal institutions created to dispense social justice and looks at their ability to do so in reference to environmental justice. The issue we want to present and discuss today is whether the structural organizations imagined by the constitutional fathers of India to act as trustees for the Indian democracy, if those structures are able to adapt to the changing needs of the population of India in its present day. The ability to restructure social justice organizations is an onerous task in a governance behemoth like India, but there are synergies in place that can be utilized in the present climate. Whether we agree with global warming or not, the ability of the planet to sustain the global population can still be calculated with remarkable accuracy. While putting the onus on the public is important, The role that institutions and governments play is of equal relevance for the global management of natural resources sustainably. Thus, looking at how national governments and institutions manage populations and the interface between people and natural resources is an ongoing effort. The Indian government and planning organizations have selected Western industrialization models for growth, starting from the Second Development Plan, which was in 1955. And the focus has been on trickle-down industrialization approach. However, India continues to remain a nation with very high regional imbalances and social inequalities. If the nation is failing in its targets, we need to look at why. So a critical look at the role of the bureaucracy, which remains the consistent and final executor and implementer of all development schemes since 1950, it needs exploration because academic literature on bureaucratic accountability is very scarce. So in our study, we look at environmental justice organizations in the Indian Himalayan region and how the central bureaucracy can interface with the local democratic forest councils to create synergy to tackle sustainable development. The main questions we are asking are, how do we manage organizational goal expectations while dealing with reality? We want a cleaner environment, but how and who ensures it? Can populous state public organizations help effect environmental change in India? The structure of our presentation is going to be like this. We relook at the Indian bureaucratic model. We place the organization in context and the environmental policy ecosystem in India. What are the institutions and stakeholders within that? And finally, we look at the new synergies that we feel exist within this system. The organization we're looking at is the famous or infamous Indian Civil Services, also known as the IAS or the Indian Administrative Service. In a federal democratic government like India, which traces its governance design complexity from the British and the American federal and prime ministerial systems, the ability of an organization to flexibly evolve to suit the need of its population is very essential. The similarity of political upheaval and polarization that is persisting in all the mentioned countries has roots within these governance organizations. So the Indian bureaucracy was established during the British period to act as this conduit of local information from the Indian elites to the British colonial government. The intention behind the organization was twofold. One, to have a local loyal workforce that you don't have to pay a lot to, and then to control the elite information processes, because naturally the ICS members were all Indians at that time. There wasn't a lot of room for professional advancements for the Indians. So when India gained independence in 1947, the Indian Civil Services was transformed into the Indian Administrative Services, where you have exams every year for selection of a permanent executive. Currently, there are 3 all-Indian services. You have the IAS, which is Indian Administrative Services. You have the Indian Forest Service and Indian Police Service. So 3 organizations altogether. And they are supported by provincial services called the PCS. The institution of IAS has transformed itself into the most powerful executive within the country today. The Indian government follows a separation of power structure with the bureaucracy created as a support system that enables the publicly selected 5-year government through changing policies. So while the government that is in power, the cabinet ministers come for 5 years and then leave, the bureaucracy once selected stays till they retire, that is till the age of 65. So they have 30 years of formal policy application experience. The country, India overall, is divided into 719 districts, 719 districts with 1 member, 1 IAS officer managing approximately 1.9 million people on an average. Also covering an approximate district area is 3,400 kilometers. Those figures are just to show how big geographically, financially, and population-wise the reach of 1 single IAS officer within this country is. So the extent of administrative reach of the bureaucracy can be traced through the geographical and administrative ability. the civil service within the district implement over 143 development schemes at any point, overseeing 56 local departments. Now, when you put that into context of a country like India, you realize how much power is concentrated within the hands of one person. So even within this slide, you can see that even though we have separation of powers, we have the legislature, judiciary, and executive. Keeping the judiciary separate, the legislature and executive, because in India, unlike the US, all the members of the legislature and the executive, that is the prime minister, have to be part of the legislature, as in they have to be formally elected for 5 years. So the executive and legislature are very much intertwined. Whereas in US, the president and his cabinet ministers need not necessarily be part of the Senate or the lower house. So we see that the legislature and executive are quite strong, and India overall has a very unionizing structure where we see a lot of centralized power because the bureaucracy is only answerable to the legislature and to the executive. So we see that within India, even though there are provincial services, even though there is a federal system in place, actually at the end of the day, it is the legislature executive at the center, also called Sashan in Hindi, and the bureaucracy, which is managing all development processes within the country. So while separation of power exists, India is basically a quasi-federal state, as the state can be created and destroyed by the central legislature at any time. So we have 28 states, but they can be changed. Their structure, their size, their geography, everything can be changed by the decision of the central government. Furthermore, all state list items, because we divide the work between the center, the state, according to the lists given within the Indian Constitution, which is a written constitution. So all state list items at any point of time can further be moved into the central list if the central so wishes. So what we see is that no matter how much power we distribute to states within India, or to even Panchayati Raj institutions, which are village institutions that were created in 1977, basically to ensure that there is democracy flowing within the country, are all answerable to the central government. So we can see that the state list items can also be moved to the central list. Furthermore, financial and tax distribution for development planning also rests only with the center. So we see that the centralizing forces are very strong. The bureaucracy itself is a centralizing factor, as they report directly to the central ministries. Thus, even though local, state, district, and village level councils exist, the ultimate administrative conversation is between the center and the bureaucracy only. There are no legal feedback loops for the population to represent itself within the Indian governance process. With less than 50% of the population voting within the last 6 elections in India. So you see 5 years, but that's 30 years, we've had less than 50% of the population voting. So the absence of people from the government is so visible. Basically, governance in India is a conversation between the bureaucrats and the central ministry. One designs policy, one implements it, one keeps moving, the center keeps moving, changing after every 5 years. But the bureaucracy stays and continues to become stronger, actually stronger than the central government also. So for our next set, I want to show how the bureaucracy fits in with green governance in India. So just like we discussed earlier, development decision-making or the issue of environmental policy, that is conservation area protection, declaration, renewable energy conservation streams, etc., all fall within local administrative schemes, thus implemented by local administration only. Thus, we see that multiple schemes being concentrated in the hands of one person, answerable only to the central ministry. So while the design of the Indian governance remains remarkably comprehensive and composite, there are no institutions that act as feedback loops for information flow within this formal system, unless explicitly suggested or sought, local opinion, which is village level opinion, is not elicited for scheme implementation. The schemes and targets remain within a conversation between the central government and local officers. Thus the people, for example, the people who propose making a dam in the Indian Himalayas are the same people who will obtain and approve the environmental clearance for it. this is an issue of accountability and overreach. So while the issue is of great complexity, how the bureaucracy and how the central government decide on development in India, a case study that highlights the above problem that is there is environmental impact assessments. So just like US, India selected to have an environmental impact assessment law passed in 1997. And according to that law, because we, in India, the country is very dependent on foreign aid for infrastructure development, even now. So most of the foreign funded aid was coming with the expectations of environmental impact assessments to be held for all projects that were going on. So it is expected that EIs will be conducted. So thus the Indian government passed the law, and then instead of making a separate organization like an environmental impact assessment, they gave the entire onus of passing or clearing the process for any infrastructure project, be it a dam, be it a road, right to the district administration again. So what we see is that it is the district administration that is creating a development project. They are the same people who are passing the development project and approving it as well. So at this point, there are more than 700 dams being built right across the Indian Himalayas. They are from 440 megawatts to right to 4 megawatts. So we have like 1,200 villages which will be inundated in the coming 15 years. And the process for allocating these villages, the power to appeal does not exist. There is no law for it. So once the central government decides that a hydropower project will be made and the local district administration decides to implement it, the villages and the smaller areas called taluks all have to fall into the same policy. The only way of repeal or appeal within the Indian legal system and administrative system does not exist. The one process that exists was Jan Panchayat, which is basically every local person getting together who will be affected, getting together and talking about it. But most people from the data available for 40 projects that we looked at are unable to even make it to the Jan Panchayat, which are basically these massive meetings that are advertised in one random Himalayan town where everyone has to attend and give their views. And naturally, they are very unsuccessful. So the mountainous Himalayan provinces in India have been leading a very dichotomous existence. These communities have very long and rich culture of collective ownership and management of common resources, both man-made and natural. So in the name of sustainable development, these people, of course, are pushed out quite regularly because, as I said, there is one IAS officer looking after 3,400 square meters of land. And as you can see from the landscape, it is very tough for these people during all seasons to travel to the bigger towns because it may take 3 to 4 days to get there and participate in the Jan Panchayats. So the society and the economy and the ecosystem are right at breaking point all across the Himalayas. So there is one community-based institutional innovation for use and management of resources born out of these testing times, which I think is a very good way forward for the bureaucracy to evolve. The informal democratic and autonomous forest councils of Van Panchayats, as they are locally known, have long managed legally demarcated village forests. The Van Panchayats are an excellent example of decentralized resource management through formal state-community partnership. They're very unique in their existence. They can well be the link that connects the central bureaucracy to the environment in India. Now, community forests are managed under the Van Panchayat Act. They balance state ownership and community responsibility. The forest committees are guided by revenue department rules and technical leadership of the forest department. These community forests, or panchayati forests as they are known, are not open to all, unlike civil forests. The community that administers the forest decides the rule of access, and the 4 main areas of ruling are use, monitoring, sanctions, and arbitration. The notion of community ownership is perhaps notional or nominal, but the sense of common property is very identifiable in the people. It can be argued that the efficacy of the bureaucracy is defined by its accessibility and its ear to the public. But we see that that does not exist within the Indian bureaucratic system. The public face is built by their real interactions with citizens and the finger on the pulse of the community and what is wrong with it. So it has to be a relationship based on trust and confidence. But if you look at the 5 points that I've put on the PPT, which is structure, administrative power, geospatial reach, input for environmental policy, and input for environmental management. As far as the IAS goes, the very structure is based on elitism. It might be born because they have so many people, such a large population to cater to, but the IAS officers do not want people to come to them. It is not a relationship of talking and sharing. Whereas what we see in a Van Panchayat is that you are accountable to the people that you are working with every day. As far as administrative power is concerned, the IAS officers have a lot of financial funds behind them to, of course, allocate for different development plans. The Van Panchayat itself does not have any financial powers, but they don't really need it as well. They don't need it because the people selected for resource protection, as in there's someone going out to look that a common area for grazing is not being overgrazed, or the same set of people that were grazing today are not coming there tomorrow. It is someone locally who would be doing that at any given point of time. So even though the IAS has more funds behind it, the Van Panchayat is actually better placed to look after the local environmental concerns. As far as geospatial reach is concerned, like I pointed out earlier, there are so many IAS officers. Once again, there is such a lack of literature, but they are unable to even visit all the corners of the area that they have to work with. Therefore, there are areas that are not visited by officers or people associated with the civil services for years. Whereas with a Van Panchayat, it is very specific. Ek din ki khoj, as in you can only work as much as you can walk one day. So you will only have an area of service which can be walked over one day. So you see that geospatial reach wise, Van Panchayat is so successful. And as far as input for environmental policy is concerned, the relationship between the center as well as the IAS is it's two directional insofar as the center says, let's build a dam or let's build a road. And the IAS says, yes, it needs to be done. Whereas if we were to involve the Van Panchayats within this conversation, they would be able to give their input to the entire process, which might be very helpful for local managements without expending any funds. So having the Van Panchayats participate within an EIA process is much more successful than just having a massive Jan Panchayat held by the IAS officers saying, let's go ahead, get these people together. You're talking about 700 villages, and let's have this massive meeting where everyone, how many people will even be able to verbalize that they have a problem? And whereas with Jan Panchayats, you have this daily sharing of information. And in fact, this information is even between villages, because Professor Singh, who has worked on Jan Panchayats for the last 10 years, he says that even within villages, even through Jan Panchayats, they end up building networks across villages where they meet each other and that they share that this village has a problem with animal husbandry, or this village has a problem with overflooding. And there is constant flow of information across these areas throughout. So at no point of time is the wisdom given by these people or shared across their village networks avoided or ignored by the other villages. Whereas what we see with the Indian bureaucracy is that they go to a very high level of information input. It is coming from all directions. So for them to ignore village level concerns is very, very common. So where is the participation? I think from my study of Van Panchayats and the Indian bureaucracy, that having an organization which is not financially draining, because India as a state only allocates 20 to 25% of its national funds, of its GDP, to social programs. So environment itself is put into the social category, and environment as a political issue never comes up within Indian politics. That itself is a very unique area that needs to be explored, why it has never been made into an election issue in such a massive country. So we are dependent on the bureaucracy for any environmental input. And the bureaucracy takes environment as just another concern which goes along with multiple other concerns. Therefore, including an organization like Van Panchayat, which is based on social justice, which is based on the idea of inclusivity and accountability, would be a very, very prudent thing to do. But it hasn't been done till now. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. So fascinating, just the concentration of power and the lack of feedback loops, which are so important. Thank you so much. Okay, our third and final presenter is going to take us into a very different realm, a realm occupied by the fairy tale therapy information model as a potential diagnostic tool for organizations. So we have our presenter, Alexander Berezkin. Alexander identifies as intersex queer. He has a professional background in research, advocacy, and public health. He got his BA in sociology at Kemerovo State University. In 2014, he was forced to immigrate to the US based on his LGBTQI activism and a homophobic campaign launched against him in Russian local mass media. In New York, he continued his activism as a director and founder of the Association of the Russian-Speaking Intersex People until 2018. From 2015 to 2018, Alexander collaborated as a consultant with the UN program Free and Equal, a partnership with the Open Society Foundations and the International Research and Exchange Board of Europe. Currently, Alexander is pursuing a master's in nonprofit management at the New School. His areas of research include intersex studies, writing for healing and social changes, queer immigration, deep psychology, fairy tale therapy, mythology, and community development. Alexander, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jill, for this great introduction. So I would like to share my presentation and I hope it will be interesting. Okay, just a moment. Okay, just sorry. Excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So what do we know about stories and why it's important when we talk about organizations? Can imagine we come in an organization and as a consultant and try to work with that environment. So what's more important for us? In every story, there's this metaphoric language, it's metaphor, and the metaphor has different functions. One function of the metaphoric language, it's help to express us emotions, especially negative one, when we try to avoid conflicts or escape from negative thoughts. Another one, it's express positive emotions, different creative insights, what we can get from reality. And the most important, metaphoric language is a language of unconsciously. It's one key for management changes and connected with that part of our psyche and social reality that hidden from us in different moments. So narrative theory recognized that storytelling is a cross-cultural method of communication. It's very important for modern high diversity organizational environment, including such factors as gender, race, religion, and other backgrounds. So in this case, stories, it's a memorable, easy to understand and establish common ground with others. In stories and organization, storytelling help us to analyze issues of relation, power, and identity. It's also used for express vision about organization dynamics, especially belief system of different members of organization. What do we think about organization? How they describe themselves, how they describe identity, how they describe activity, how they connected with this activity to make their job better. Also, storytelling presents not only events, but facts with meaning and framing from the speaker. For example, in this triad model, we can see that there's a different stories from the past, future, and present. In this case, people try to find what's more important for them. And we can ask this, why it's important for them, why they would like to talk about, for example, social media fragments, or about mission organization, how it's connected with the O activity, and how they present themselves for audience, for customers, and for other workers. Does it have any impact on their work process and human rights resources and other questioning? Another moment that was important for storytelling, it analyzes symbolic internal organization communication messages. So sometimes people can talk about how it's important to provide social justice for different customs groups, how it's possible to provide more resources. And this speech can be very proactive, performative, or also it can be empty speech. It's the terminology from psychoanalysis that describe that person can talk about different objects and using a lot of passive voices. So it's not about some action, it's more about I would like to escape from this topic and talk about something completely different. It's not interesting for me. So what's hidden for this conversation? How it can help us to understand what kind of changes we need to recommend for this organization and what will be useful for organization redesigning. In this case, it's interesting to use story as a metaphoric language or fairy tale. It helps us to thinking out of box, out of our binary thoughts about what we should do this organization like researchers or consultant. In this case, this presentation is of course, very theoretical view. It's unfortunately it doesn't have any practical application, but maybe it will be useful for somebody just thinking how we can use creativity instruments for redesigning, rethinking our process of understanding what's happening in the organization. So why we talk about fairy tales? In this particular moment, it's of course, it's all my interest, and also there's different models. What is it fairy tales? Usually we think it's a funny, or maybe sometimes not funny, stories about adventure, about charming prince, beautiful princess. And we have never thinking how it can be connected with our reality when we adult people, and we forgot about fairy tales. There's a different approach analysis fairy tales. One of them from deep psychology, and it describes fairy tales as a symbolic art, it's symbolic poetry. So in this case, for example, the fairy tale about Snow White, it can be fairy tale about dysfunctional family, or it can be fairy tale about fear of how to be adult and fear of the death. And Snow White and Equal Queen, it can be different aspect of our personality. Also, can you imagine using fairy tale Snow White for describing dynamic power and identity in an organization? Is it possible? What does it give us? What does it give us as researchers? Maybe we can see hidden meaning behind performance, behind what people say, behind the stage where we perform ourselves as a workers. So how I mentioned, there's different models of study fairy tales. The most famous and popular, it's monomyth. It was created by Joseph John Campbell, American professor of literature, who wrote a lot of books, and one of them, it was about a general pattern of adventure across cultures. So there's one hero, or it can be woman or man or somebody else, who go to the adventure and try to find gift when this they can use this gift for themselves or for community. The most popular image of this is, of course, Star Wars. And George Lucas made an interview where he described how the books of Joseph Campbell had impact on his creativity. So Joseph Campbell described this adventure in different 12 stages with different levels, what's happened with the hero during this adventure. Some people try to use this model for theory of changes. Look at this. For example, call to adventure, what it can be. It's a desire to increase overruns. What's happened with us? What's happened with problems? What resources we have to make decision about these problems? Do we need to ask a very good mother, like it's a consultant or researcher from some another organization that help us to recognize what do we need to find this gift to provide changes? How we can accept these changes? What kind of enemies we can meet in our adventure? Maybe the most important enemies, it's about ourselves, how it's difficult to provide changes and meet with different obstacles in this process. So it's one model. The problem of this model, in my case, it can be very long, January, 12 studies, can you imagine? And sometimes it's not useful. So I try to describe another model from Professor Ricky Greenwald. He's a clinical psychologist. He used particularly one fairy tale about slaying the dragon and how it can be useful for for changes about behavior teenagers. And I thought, well, if we can use, for example, Joseph Campbell model for theory of changes, can we use this fairy tale model for changes in organization? Maybe we can organize a game, or we can use it like special points for our interview with different members of organization. Let's see what can be goals of this fairy tale model. Of course, we can figure out challenges, what's happened. We can try to figure out what the conflicts behind what people say about organization, how they present themselves in the organization. And also we can figure out what goals or what tasks people have in this organization. It's only about get reward. What kind of reward? Or it's about protection, or it's about safety. So this question um, can be visible in our interview or our different methods. But sometimes people try to avoid this question or don't answer for this question directly. Or when they answer directly, they usually perform special stories that they already created for interview, for answer for questions, for participate different research. When they try to describe themselves in the elements with fairy tales or game, they usually don't think what's happening. They don't try control themselves in this game. They just play. They try to show what's more useful for them in this particular moment. And it can show us who is a formal leader, who is informal leader, what kind of communication they use, how they collaborate with each other, how they try to find decision. And based on this model, professor used different elements of fairy tales and how it can be connected with questions about ourselves and about communication with others and what kind of resources we have. For example, once upon a time, something happened in the kingdom. Kingdom, it can be described as the organization. Do we have a lot of resources to protect this organization? What would we like to do in this organization? Just imagine you can ask your respondent, describe your organization as a kingdom. We can find maybe additional insights and creativity, or we can find different challenges and different dragons. In this case, princess or charming prince, and can be reward and goals, what we would like achieve and what we we need to do for achieve these rewards. Of course, we need to think about plan goals and tasks, and how we need to find magic sword, how should we kill dragon, or we should feed dragon, or maybe make dragon as our pet, who knows. So all these interesting moments that can be useful for creativity of our imagination about research and about organization. So what kind of possible outcomes could be in this field? Of course, it helps us to see vision of ourselves and organization. It motivate us to integrate with our and other co-workers, mapping different events and collaboration with ourselves and put ourselves in this communication field and organization. If you have any questions, please ask me. I will be glad to answer these, and hope you have interesting time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alexander, and all the panelists. Now I will move us to gallery view for our conversation and Q&A section. One moment here. Okay, I invite the panelists to unmute yourselves, and we're going to move straight into the Q&A in the interest of time. And we'll start by addressing questions that popped up in the Q&A chat box. And really, a lot of these center around HR practices. So Olivet, I'm sure will be leaning heavily on your experience and expertise. So just starting off, can you speak on creating spaces for staff to process post-election and additional suggestions on how to support staff through difficult times? Obviously, we know this will be a very stressful time, especially for nonprofit staff members where resources are already scarce. And so any suggestions you have on that would be very helpful.
Oh, sure, Joe. Thank you for the question. I do acknowledge that in addition to the politics, I think when folks return to work on the whole after the global pandemic and when things level out, that it is going to be a very different organization. Our organizations are going to be very different. And so the responsibility for HR will be to hold those spaces, definitely. But it starts with self-awareness. Everyone in the room with a clear understanding of who it is and who am I in this process, how am I showing up, and having a facilitator or someone on the team who can channel those conversations. I just want to acknowledging the biases that come up and discussing them openly, without fear of victimization or without fear of being labeled, but just to have some honest and open dialogue. And this could look very different for different organizations. Some, large organizations may have the resources and they may have the personnel internal to do it. Others may have to seek external help. However, and I think that maybe doing it by group, by teams, but what I would also recommend is that the leadership has to take on a very central role in the process, and it should not be only HR or only one team, but it has to be led from the front, so that a conversation with the leaders has to be at the start, at the outset. What are the issues we're facing? How are we going to address this? And what are our outcomes? What are we looking for? What is it? Really understanding what people are facing, what they're going through, and allowing them the opportunity to share what they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and leadership and sponsorship alignment is critical, right, to change. And it calls to mind Shriti's and Thriti's presentation and the dichotomy between this centralized power source at the state level and village councils whose power and influence has been diluted quite a bit. So in terms of your work, Shriti and Thriti, we know obviously it's very specific to place, and it has its roots in historical and institutional groundings with relation to India. So because it's so specific to place, what can the audience learn from your research in this example? Like, what can we extrapolate from the actions at the local village level in terms of how they're dealing with the power dynamics at the state level, and what can we extrapolate and apply on a global scale and apply in a variety of institutions?
Actually, I just attended a training a couple of months ago where I had like more than 1,000 people all across the world, all looking at environmental policy of different countries. And it's very surprising. In fact, it's not surprising that most of the rural areas across the world, including there were so many participants from US and from, like I said, like from Europe as well as Southeast Asia, who are having the same problem, the disconnect between the village and the growing cities. And the thing is that we can't prevent the cities from becoming bigger and more powerful, and you have more powerful people concentrated there as well. So you will always have this dichotomy of having more power concentrated in the bigger cities. And there's a lot of issues here. You have urbanization, you have power structures, you have the fact that it's more socio-economically active people collected there. So as far as environmental policy is concerned in this issue, it's usually the places which are peripheral, which are exploited more. Whether you take it for mining, whether you take it for dam building, whether you take it for power projects, it is always the peripheral areas that are always exploited more. So it's not just in the Indian Himalayas, it's just that it's one very fragile ecology. Whether you talk about the Amazon, whether you talk about Southeast Asia, the fact is that it is the organizations or the big capitals which are controlling these very peripheral areas, which are very disconnected in terms of policy, in terms of demographic, in terms of socio-economic division. But for me, the biggest question, the reason I'm even presenting or even went this way is that even though it's such an obvious solution, the integrating a semi-formal organization within the larger formal structure, which doesn't necessarily require money or more government machinery, seems intuitive, like a country would do that. But despite that, the Indian government and the Indian formal institutions in 70 years have been unable to do that. And for me, at this point, I do not see a solution, because while I was conducting interviews with village panchayats, they say that the government is the other and that we cannot prevent development. They say, hum rok nahi sakte, which basically means we can't stop this. They feel so disempowered. So for me, the possible solution would be for the one panchayats to be included and have a dialogue with the village, with the district administration. But it's just that we're also talking about quantity. There are more than 4,001 panchayats within one district. So there are questions of number and questions of area, geography that are very tough at this point for me to answer. Like, I did not find a way out.
Right. And yeah, and it might take a very long time. I mean, social change is a very, very long process. And there are things you said that also resonates with Alexander's presentation, you know, and the power of being a part of the dialogue and the potential power of creative storytelling in an institutional context. And I'm really curious because, you know, in the study of organizational change, so many components of the change process are analogous to storytelling. You know, we do stakeholder mapping, force field analysis, stakeholder analysis. You know, these all can be plot points along a story. And Alexander, we have, you know, a question for you before we have to wrap. What, in terms of speaking to institutions, especially in the for-profit space, who might be somewhat resistant to this idea of using a fairy tale or storytelling model, how do you suggest expressing the value and potential impact of this approach to get institutions to buy into it?
Thank you for the question. I think it's very important in our time thinking what do we present for audience. We already create different stories, what's happened about COVID epidemic, about elections. And in this case, well, you maybe cannot use storytelling as a tool. Just be careful if you're really concerned about social changes. Be careful how you talk with audience, how you talk with people around you. And and we live in the world of social media. So many stories around us. The most of them right now, it's about hateness, about not respect each other. Try to create more positive stories, more stories about achievements, social changes. It can be very inspirational and help us to understand that we are not alone and that we can struggle with different obstacles and just go forward.
Thank you. And we might have to wrap soon. I know Latha wants to give some closing remarks. Should I hand it over to you, Latha?
Sure. All right, thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted to remind you to please keep a watch out for when we send out the videos to everybody that attended, so you can actually go back and look at the slides and listen to the talks and the discussion. And in every event, we always wish that we had another 30 minutes, but I don't think that 30 minutes will solve any problem, but we all have to go back to our jobs and do other things too. And so the next event is going to be a workshop, which will be a very interesting one, because this is by two design professors, one from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and the other from University of Minnesota. And so they're going to talk about, a design. How do you actually basically unlearn radicalized or racialized design, which is the design, they call it the design justice. Like 80% of things that are developed are developed for 20% of the world, that is the elite. And so, and it is, designed with a dominant person or dominant group in mind. And so they're going to talk about their toolkit. And so it will be an experiential workshop where you can learn some of the tools on how to apply a design to actually unlearn racism. And so please join us. That's on November 5th at noon. And of course, please go vote if you're an American, if you already haven't, and get a friend to vote, because November 5th is going to be an interesting time to get together. We may not have the results. We have no idea how our country is going to look like. So please go vote. So thank you so much for joining us, and looking forward to continuing. And if you have ideas to be featured for the next year, that is 21-22 academic year, please join us. So thank you, panelists, for joining. And really, it was fantastic to hear all your perspectives and experiences and your knowledge. And thank you, Jill, for the very able facilitation. And I'm so excited to see you after a while. So excellent. So have a really great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye. All right.
So that's all.
That's it. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Okay,
Come back
bye.
and attend to the other events. They're great. They're really fantastic.
Yeah, they're very interesting. Unfortunately, I have part-time job and sometimes I cannot visit.
Of course, but you know that the recordings are available. Yep. All right. Okay. Akhil, do you want to get on call later? Like